her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Biggs and Representative Dean. It is an honor to testify before you today on child exploitation, both here in the United States and internationally. Today, we have an opportunity to address one of the most important human rights issues, but also one of the most critical global security issues facing our world: the exploitation of children for profit by human traffickers, human smugglers, and advanced criminal networks. Child exploitation and sex trafficking is big business, and unlike any other human rights abuse, it is a transnational organized crime. This is the Subcommittee on Crime, and human trafficking specifically generates $150 billion in profits for traffickers annually, and it is the second largest criminal enterprise in the world. The average age sex trafficking victims are targeted is just 11 to 14 years old. China, Russia, North Korea, the Taliban, and terrorist groups all use child trafficking to fund their operations because, unlike drugs or weapons, a person can be sold over and over again. Child sex trafficking also funds organized criminal networks, including MS-13, one of the most notorious gangs operating in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And these three countries make up 87% of unaccompanied children apprehended at the southern border. A U.S. Treasury investigation found that money generated by local MS-13 cliques engaged in sex trafficking, and this is a quote, sex trafficking, drug trafficking, murder for hire, extortion, and money laundering, and it was consolidated and funneled to the group's central leadership in Central America. The reality is that children are a primary component of this illicit finance network. Many of the Latin American children sent across the border have been taken by organized criminals such as this, and what frequently follows is child sexual exploitation or labor exploitation. From March through May of this year, more than 33,000 unaccompanied children crossed the U.S. border, and the physical and sexual violence, hunger, and thirst that these children often experience traveling to the United States is appalling. Many children and parents who arrive in the United States are from remote regions of Central America, which are often impoverished and isolated, specifically by language barriers. And I think this is something that most people don't recognize. For example, nearly half of those who cross the U.S. border are from Guatemala. And within this one nation, they have 24 different dialects, which means it is difficult to speak with parents regarding the incredible risks that their children face if they send them to the U.S. And because of this, coyotes often trick or coerce mothers into paying children's hefty smuggling fees. And the mothers do so because they believe a better life awaits their children in the United States. And unfortunately, this is often not the case. Because of scenarios like this, many unaccompanied children eventually enter the U.S. foster care system. But we know that the foster care system is already incredibly overburdened, and 60% of child trafficking victims are current or former foster youth. In fact, just a few days ago, it was reported that human trafficking rings have been targeting children in temporary foster care settings, specifically in Texas. And Child Protective Services has paid $30 million to off-duty police officers to watch children who are housed unsupervised in hotels and churches because there is no family for them within the foster care system. Increased burdens on the foster care system put already vulnerable children firmly into the crosshairs of online sexual exploitation and abuse, which has become one of the fastest growing threats against children globally, as we know today. Child trafficking at the southern border is real, and at the same time in our modern world, human trafficking is a borderless crime, and so is sexual exploitation. The most prevalent form of online sexual abuse is the advertisement of children, actually, through websites and social media. According to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, such advertisements, and this is a quote, such advertisements for sexual services are now central to the human trafficking business model, end quote. And another study concluded that 75% of sex trafficking victims are advertised online. There are many things that we can do, but to stop human trafficking at its core, we must prioritize widespread prevention curriculum here in the United States so that all children can recognize and report their own abuse. The UNODC actually reported that most victims identified in cases, and this is a recent report, were, quote, self-rescued. That means that they had to self-report or escape exploitation on their own. And this is why that's one of the most important fixes that we have. I also encourage you to prioritize many of the bills which have been spoken here today, whether it be the Earn It Act, Report Act, SHIELD Act, and more. Thank you so much for your time.